are moments in life you never forget. Not because they're beautiful, not because they're hacky, but because they become a line between the person you used to be and the person you were forced to become afterward. For me, that moment happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in November. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a Whole Foods in Austin, Texas. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. I opened my banking app to check my balance before going inside. Balance, $12. I blinked, checked again. Still $12. 3 weeks earlier, that account had nearly $47,000 in it. I sat there for 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't make a phone call. I didn't move. I just stared through the rain and tried to understand how the one person I trusted more than anyone else in the world could have done this to me. His name was Ryan Mitchell, and for 10 years he had been my best friend. I want to tell you who Ryan was before I tell you what he did, because if I simply call him a con artist, you'll probably think I was stupid. You'll wonder how anyone could trust another person that much. But Ryan wasn't the kind of man who made people suspicious. He wasn't cold, he wasn't aggressive, he didn't have that look some people have, the look that makes you keep your guard up. Ryan was one of the warmest people I'd ever met. We met in 2013 at Moral Tour on the campus of Ohio State University. I was 19 years old. It was my first time living away from home. I had a backpack of clothes and a loneliness I didn't know how to talk about. Ryan lived in the room next to mine. His door was always open, music was always playing, and one night when I was standing awkwardly in the hallway trying to figure out where the dining hall was, he looked at me and said, "Hey man, you hungry? I know a place." That night, we ended up eating burgers at a little restaurant a few blocks from campus. Somewhere during that conversation, I told him about my dad, about the cancer, about my mum trying to hold everything together, about the guilt I felt for leaving home while my family was struggling. Ryan didn't give me one of those empty motivational speeches. He didn't say, "Everything's going to be okay." Instead, he looked at me and said, "That sounds heavy, man. You're carrying a lot." That was it. One simple sentence. But it was the first time in months that I felt like someone was actually listening. 10 years later, Ryan stood beside me at my father's funeral. My dad died in the spring of 2021. The cancer had spread to his brain. Toward the end, there were days when he didn't even recognize me. And somehow, that hurt even more than losing him. Ryan drove 9 hours from Austin to Columbus just to be there. He stood beside me through the entire service, and when I finally broke down in front of everyone, he placed a hand on my shoulder without saying a word. I remember thinking, this is what a real brother looks like. What I didn't know was that he had already begun building the plan that would eventually destroy my life. 6 months after my father's funeral, I got the phone call that changed everything. A fast-growing tech startup in Austin called Nexabridge wanted to hire me as the director of business development. The starting salary was $115,000 a year, plus equity.
The kind of opportunity that could completely change someone's future. I called Ryan before I even called my mum. "Ethan," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You were made for this." To join the company's equity program, I needed to invest $47,000, every dollar I had saved during 4 years of working after college. Because Ryan worked in financial consulting, I asked him to look over everything. For years, he had helped me understand investments, tax documents, and financial paperwork. I trusted him completely. I had sent him bank statements, personal information, financial records, things I never would have shared with almost anyone else. It never crossed my mind that one day those things could be used against me. Ryan sat with me for nearly 3 hours. He opened spreadsheets, walked me through projections, explained risks, answered every question I had. Everything looked legitimate, everything made sense. Finally, he slid the paperwork across the table. "You can read through it again if you want," he said, "but I've already checked everything. This is the best move for you." I looked at him, the guy who had stood beside me at my father's funeral, the guy who had driven 9 hours just to say, "I'm here." And I signed, without reading every page, without questioning anything, because it was Ryan. 92 days later, I was sitting across from Nexabridge's legal team in a conference room, so cold it felt like an interrogation chamber. They placed a stack of documents on the table, screenshots, transaction records, contracts, and on the very first page was a signature bearing my name. At first glance, it looked exactly like mine, but I knew I'd never signed that document. I'd never even seen it before. The attorney looked at me carefully, not with anger, not with sympathy, just the exhausted expression of someone who had seen too many disasters like this. "Mr. Walsh," he said, "the money never entered Nexabridge's equity program." My stomach dropped. He continued, "It was transferred to a shell company in Delaware." He paused. "That company no longer exists." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I called Ryan the second I walked out of the building. No answer. I called again. No answer. I texted him, "Ryan, call me back, now." Nothing. The next day I called again, and the day after that. For 3 straight days, his phone kept ringing, my messages kept showing as delivered, but he never responded. On the 4th day, I drove to his apartment in Clarksville, on the west side of Austin. I'd spent countless nights there. I knew the elevator code. I knew where he kept the spare key. I knew that apartment almost as well as my own. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I unlocked the door and immediately knew something was wrong. The apartment wasn't empty in the normal sense. It wasn't the kind of empty you see when someone leaves for work or goes away for the weekend. It's the kind of empty that says, "I'm never coming back." Half the closet was cleared out. His computer was gone. Important files were gone. Most of the drawers were empty. The only thing left behind was a coffee mug sitting in the kitchen sink, as if he'd stepped out for 5 minutes, but I knew he wasn't coming back. I stood in the middle of my best friend's apartment, and for the first time in my life, I felt the ground disappear beneath me. 2 weeks later, I received a court summons. My name had been connected to a financial fraud investigation worth more than $340,000, not as a victim, as a suspect. The investigation revealed something even worse. Ryan hadn't just stolen my $47,000, he had spent years building a network of fraudulent transactions using my identity. He had opened business credit lines in my name, signed investment agreements using forged documents, created accounts connected to my personal information. By the time investigators finished tracing everything, the total amount exceeded $340,000, and on paper, every trail led back to one person, me. The next 8 months were the hardest of my life. Lawyers, investigators, interviews, court filings, endless nights staring at the ceiling. Every morning I woke up wondering whether one mistake, one misunderstanding, one missing piece of evidence could destroy everything. I lost my job,
I lost my savings. I barely slept for almost a year. But those weren't the hardest things to lose. The hardest thing was trust. Trust in other people. Trust in my own judgment. Trust in the idea that I could truly know someone. Ryan was eventually arrested in Phoenix, Arizona, 4 months after he disappeared. He was living under a different name, renting a small apartment week to week. The first time I saw him again was in a courthouse hallway, and when our eyes met, he didn't look away. He didn't lower his head. He didn't apologize. He just looked at me, straight into my eyes, and there was nothing there. No guilt, no anger, no fear, just emptiness. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The worst part wasn't what Ryan had done to me. The worst part was that I had never truly known who he was. Some people hurt you because they hate you, but the deepest wounds usually come from the people who once made you feel safe. I lost money, I lost my career, I barely slept for almost a year, but the thing that took the longest to recover was my faith in people. And maybe that's what Ryan really stole from me. My name is Ethan, and this is my story. In the next episode, I'll tell you about the one sentence Ryan said to me inside that courtroom. Just one sentence, but it haunted me far more than everything else he ever did. If you want to hear that story, subscribe and turn on notifications. I won't keep you waiting long.